Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's able to join us today for this really important discussion. We have a wonderful panel of experts here today, and I will be introducing them and we'll get started. My name is Meredith McQuaid, and I am the Associate Vice President and Dean for International Programs at the University of Minnesota. And this panel discussion today is sponsored by the Human Rights Program at the University of Minnesota, one of our outstanding programs here. And we're delighted that we're able to gather all of us together to talk about the state of academic freedom in an era of globalized education. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. I'll introduce all of them at the same time. And then each of them is going to take about 5 minutes to give a little bit of their background and a little bit of their perspective on this important topic. So I'm going to introduce them in the order in which you will hear them speak after I introduce them all. So our first speaker is going to be Sarah McLaughlin. She is the Senior Program Officer for Legal and Public Advocacy at the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, which is an organization that aims to defend and sustain the individual rights of students and faculty members at America's colleges and universities. Following Dr. McLaughlin, we will have Dr. Omar Sharifi, who is an assistant professor of social sciences and humanities at the American University of Afghanistan, and the country director of the American Institute of Afghanistan Studies, and a research fellow at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs here at the University of Minnesota. Following Dr. Sharifi, we will hear from Dr. Liviu Matei, a professor of higher education and public policy and head of the School of Education, Communication and Society at King's College London. And our fourth speaker is Dr. Tung Biao, a human rights lawyer and visiting professor at the University of Chicago, whose work includes a focus on the Chinese Communist Party surveillance of Chinese students abroad. So again, we'll begin with Dr. McLaughlin. Each of them will have about 5 minutes to give a little bit more about themselves and their perspective, and then we're going to have a real discussion. So thanks very much. Dr. McLaughlin.
Hi, so thanks for having me today. I'm looking forward to this discussion. So I'll start off by giving a little bit of background on FIRE, what we do generally. So we're a nonpartisan nonprofit organization that defends academic freedom and free expression on college campuses. So that means we'll defend the rights of university communities to engage in speech without punishment, as long as it's protected under law and policy. So we frequently deal with cases like student groups who aren't allowed to invite a speaker, professors suspended for controversial tweets that go viral. That one's happening a lot lately. Student protests being censored, student newspapers that aren't allowed to publish, basic stories of censorship like that. So to give a little quick summary of the law here, public universities are bound by the First Amendment. So that means that they generally can't censor speech unless it's unprotected by law. Private universities don't share that same legal commitment, but they often have, commitments that they make in their handbooks, in their policies, and faculty contracts. But the thing is, they don't always follow those contracts. So at FIRE, I spent about 5 years working with students and professors who had some kind of rights violations, who were censored, suspended, punished. So I've also long had an interest in global censorship issues. And in recent years, what I've been noticing is that my personal interest in global censorship and my work at FIRE, defending student rights, they've started to converge in troubling ways. So more and more, I've been seeing that, these censorship stories have been related to authoritarian governments, most often China. And, that's increasingly becoming, one of the stories of campus censorship. So this plays out in a number of ways. There's pressure that authoritarian governments put on universities. A consulate will complain when a speaker's been invited that they don't like. There are troubling relationships that universities form with, creating partnerships with foreign governments. And then they have financial considerations, you know, on the speech they're willing to host or what programs they're willing to pursue, because you know, they have a financial relationship with the foreign government and they don't want to imperil that relationship. And then we've also had, you know, concerns about international students in both directions. So we've seen increasingly that some student groups are trying to control what's said on campus, most often about China, and they're trying to use university policies to get critics of China censored. And then lastly, international students are also the victims of censorship, because they have to deal with concerns about what they say following them home. You know, if they engage in a protest at a US campus, will their parents be visited by the police? Will they be able to get a job when they get home? Will they be arrested, which has been the case for some students? One good recent example took place at George Washington University in DC. So there we had student groups who actually temporarily convinced the administration to investigate students who put up flyers and posters that were criticizing the Olympics in Beijing. And, you know, it's troubling. We had, you know, a campus police force that was willing to use its surveillance powers to find, you know, student critics who very well could get in trouble if they were from China when they returned home. They were responsible for those posters. So, you know, that's a major concern we have about, you know, the state of free speech on campus today. So to wrap up, what we're seeing more and more is that speech critical of authoritarian governments is becoming a source of contention on campus. And for the most part, I don't think that university administrations have been doing the necessary work to figure out how to counter this issue, and how to protect their students and free expression on their campus when it comes to authoritarian censorship abroad.
Thank you so much, Dr. McLaughlin. We're looking forward to hearing more from you. Dr. Sharifi is next, but I neglected to do two of my important jobs as moderator, and that is to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. And also, as you have questions, which I'm sure you will on this important topic, please put them in the Q&A. Questions in the chat will likely not be addressed. There's a Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, as I'm sure we all know by now, but feel free to put your questions in there. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Sharifi.
Thank you very much, Dean McQuaid and others for inviting me here. It's actually a pleasure. Just to start about talking about the academic sort of like education in Afghanistan in general, like to give like a kind of a quick background. In the last 20 years, especially after the international intervention, Afghanistan has witnessed a tremendous kind of expansion of education, both for women and for girls and for boys and for men and for women across the country, in which millions of students, people went to schools, hundreds of thousands went to higher educations, and thousands managed to actually get even study abroad and go back to home and work. But as everybody knows, after the fall of Kabul in August 2021 and the coming of the Taliban back in power, we see almost a kind of a systematic destruction of specifically the higher education system first by the Taliban regime, and more importantly, like the banning of education for women. Now, the question is like, what is the point of doing that and why that is happening, and can it be reversed in general? I mean, this was something that's kind of come to not kind of look at that. I mean, the Taliban policies toward education was dismantling of the modern education system, universities, specifically private universities, which a lot of them, like, you know, established in the last 20 years, now they're being systematically being dismantled. The government universities or public universities, which were there before, now lost most of its kind of cadre. Hundreds of professors, scholars who are teaching in universities are forced to leave, or like leave their country, or even leave their jobs because of the Taliban policies. Now, the Taliban, in a way, opposition to the education, which kind of sounds bizarre in the 21st century, It does not come because they're simply a totalitarian regime or kind of an authoritarian government. It comes because of the ideology that Taliban and Talibanism presents and it believes in. And that is to stand fundamentally opposed to the idea of modern education. They see the modern education as something that, like a free thinking, free education, this something to see that kind of opposes what they believe, their understanding of Islam. Because for the Taliban, their policies in terms of they always justify their policies in terms of like being according to Islam. But for the Taliban, Islam is just not a faith, it is an ideology. And that's why modern education, specifically women's education, is seen as something that contradicts their ideological beliefs. And that is simply, if you can just trace it and put it in a kind of a long durée of how the Taliban imagine themselves and why they oppose the education, modern education in Afghanistan in general. It kind of goes back to 100 years ago when Afghanistan kind of became a modern nation state, and the whole idea of being a nation state was based on 3 principles. The first principle was to have a constitution in which it's based on Islam, but it's only for the citizens of Afghanistan. Second was like, if we are a nation, then it must be for men and women. Therefore, universal education became a pillar of the sort of like being modern and being kind of a nation state. And the third aspect of that sort of step in order to kind of build a nation state was archaeology, to kind of discover history of Afghanistan before religion and if possible after religion. But once the Taliban when they came the first time in their power in 1996, they, in a way, for the 3 most important things that they did once they came to power is to kind of abolish the constitution, ban the women, and in a way destroy Afghanistan's pre-Islamic cultural heritage and historical heritage. So what we today seeing, and I believe the situation will get very worse, is like mass arrests of the people who actually, the professors, targeted attacks on schools, who actually is still trying to sort of like keep like private schools and training centers that kind of trying to teach modern sciences, and in a way also banning of the girls beyond 6th grade. Now the world is trying to kind of understand this idea and trying to find a way how to deal with this kind of phenomenon. But at the same time, that for the Taliban regime and their supporters in the region, specifically in Pakistan and others, we're seeing that there is an absolute no inclination, nor a decision, nor even an idea to change their policies, because for them, looking at education in a way that people think for themselves and not being part of like the ability to articulate their thoughts is just seen as fundamentally in opposition to an ideological understanding of Islam that kind of constitutes the core of Taliban. So today we see an absolute chaos, an absolute wasteland in terms of modern education, but it does not mean that the people are not actually trying to study. Thanks to sort of modern technology, I'm still connected with my students in Afghanistan. I'm trying to be very cautious about it, because if I just talk about it much more, they might go and harm them. But we teach, we're still connected, we share, like there are a lot of kind of efforts are going on to sort of continue the education through modern, using technology. And even once the Taliban banned the girls' schools, I think about maybe less than a month ago, completely, there were a lot of people came and volunteered to teach them through using kind of internet and using even like online courses and stuff. Now, how long that will take for the Taliban and their supporters to sort of completely cut the internet, I don't know. But the point is that education has become now this, in a way, a face of kind of way of opposing totalitarianism and authoritarianism of Taliban, and it's going on. And I'll be happy to discuss it further during the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sharifi. Next, we have Dr. Matei. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for the invitation. So I'm Liviu Matei. I have worked for many years in Hungary, the last 2-3 years in Austria, and now I have been in the UK for a month, a little bit longer than a month. So that is Europe geographically defined. So you might be surprised to hear someone like me coming from Europe and talking about a crisis of academic freedom in Europe. So I am indeed claiming that we are in the middle of a crisis of academic freedom in Europe. And I'm not going to talk too much about that, but I might come back to it in a moment, because I think that is relevant for our discussion about the state of academic freedom in the world, and including when we talk about repression of academic freedom. So my experiences with academic freedom have been diverse, both kind of personal, institutional, and also as a researcher and as a policy entrepreneur. So I worked for many years at Central European University in Budapest, Hungary. That university was forced out of the country on the threat of being closed down by the Hungarian government. So Hungarian government being the government of a European Union country, reputed to be a democratic union of states, Hungary being reputed to be a democratic country, but that is an example actually of repression of academic freedom by an authoritarian regime. And I have also, I have studied academic freedom and other related aspects, and I had the chance to be part of major practical efforts to codify and promote academic freedom. I have been a member of the team that has developed the autonomy scorecard, which became kind of the European model of university autonomy, of a very consequential one. And then I have done a lot of work in Kazakhstan, and more recently in Myanmar, between the last two military regime, working as well on setting up together with Burmese colleagues and the authorities, the democratically elected authorities of that time, to set up a national system for national framework for academic freedom. And the last thing I wanted to mention here, I have helped establish a global observatory on academic freedom, which is working specifically on, or is promoting research on the conceptualization, codification of academic freedom, and how they have an impact on practices and policies. By way of introduction to the topic of the discussion, let me also say that this is a very timely discussion, the one that you have proposed for this seminar, academic freedom, repression of academic freedom. And I should say, there are degrees of academic freedom and degrees of restriction of academic freedom, and they go for almost complete academic freedom to almost no academic freedom at all. And when we talk about repression, I should say, and I alluded to this when I spoke about the case of Hungary, repression of academic freedom can happen even in countries, in regions that are reputed democratically, when we are facing an authoritarian regime like that of Hungary. And it happens in many parts of the world. And it is also something that touches aspects that go beyond national regulatory frameworks, national higher education system. And there is where there is a kind of intellectual problem in the understanding and analysis of such situations. And just to be very, very brief on that, the conceptual references for academic freedom that we are using nowadays are basically were meant originally for national use, or for use within the boundaries of national higher education systems. So in Europe, one of the dominant definitions still is the one of Humboldt from the early 1800s. In the United States, the AAUP definition from 1914, 1916, and they ignore very much the international dimension of academic freedom, which leads to a kind of intellectual element of the crisis of academic freedom. We don't have a conceptual reference for academic freedom that accounts for the international aspects of higher education more generally.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Matai. And our fourth expert is Dr. Tung Biao, and he'll tell us a little bit more about himself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll talk a little bit about my personal experience of academic freedom being threatened both in China and the United States. I taught at a university in Beijing. I was also a human rights lawyer and dissident in China. And because of my academic work and also human rights activities, I was banned from teaching and eventually fired by the university. And I was put under house arrest from time to time, and my passport was confiscated, and I was also disbarred and even kidnapped by the Chinese secret police and detained and tortured. So in China, the human rights situation has been deteriorating. It's getting worse and worse, especially since Xi Jinping came to power in 2013. And many human rights lawyers, defenders were detained and tortured, and many scholars, professors have been fired, and some scholars were even arrested and convicted, including my friend Dr. Xu Zhiyong and the Uyghur scholar Ilham Tohti, who was sentenced to life. And so they and when I came to the United States in late 2014, I found that Chinese government has been the increasing threat to global academic freedom and free speech. And I've been documenting such cases and examples. One thing is I was invited by ABA, the American Bar Association, to write a book about Chinese law and politics. And after I signed the agreement, the ABA rescinded the proposal, and they told me to publish my book would endanger their programs in China. So it's a typical case of self-censorship. And I noticed that the vast majority of China scholars, the Western scholar, global scholars on China study practice self-censorship, and it's quite common. If they read something angering Beijing, and then their visa will be denied. And many American professors and not only American, but the professors and the journalists and the writers all over the world were banned from entering China because of their report and their research. So the visa denial is frequently used by the Chinese government to censor the speech or to promote the Chinese government's narrative. And I teach at a couple of universities in New York and recently at University of Chicago, and some students, especially those students from mainland China, are interested in my course, but they dare not to register because if they register my course, and then they might be reported to the Chinese consulate, Chinese government, and they would have trouble when they go back to China to work or to anyway. Many Chinese students will have to go back to China. And I mentioned many times the case of Luo Daiqing. I just realized he's from University of Minnesota, so he was detained and sentenced to 6 months in China because when he was in the United States, in Minnesota, he posted something on Twitter. And we know the Chinese government monitors the Chinese scholars and the students quite closely through, especially through CSSA, the Chinese Students and Scholars Associations, and we, yeah, I hope we can talk about those associations and other influence operations by the Chinese government.
Thank you, Dr. Tung. So this is really what a great group of people. You each have very unique perspectives, all related to a topic that should concern all of us. And if all of the panelists could turn their screens on. So please, I'll just remind you to post any questions you have in the Q&A, not in the chat. And we'll try to get to those as we can. And I'm just going to start. I'm going to start just a little more narrowly here about the University of Minnesota and international students and scholars here as an example for universities and colleges all across the United States, and then take it a little more broadly and likely have to also include good questions from our audience. But so for all of our panelists, there is, I think, some awareness by those of us in administration of higher education in the United States that various governments monitor the behavior of their students and scholars while in the country, while in the US. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, and how do we address the attitude that I think there's lots of people in this country who would say, well, I mean, it's a citizen of that country with that kind of a regime, and they're going to go home and have to deal with the consequences. So really, is it our place as university administrators or professors or colleagues to become involved? And if we were to become involved, what can we do about it? So that is a multi-layered question. Happy to hear from any and all of you. You can just jump in, and I'd love to hear what you have to say about that.
Oh, I'd love to start off. So I have a few thoughts about that. I hear this a lot from people who, are in the United States, and they think, why should I care if, someone from another country comes here and doesn't think they can speak freely? And I think that should, personally, to me, I think that's a basic moral question. But if that part doesn't convince you, I think it really is important for people to realize that that also affects their rights too. I mean, part of free speech is the right to hear things too. And if you have a segment of the population here that can't speak, that affects your right to hear different perspectives, different points of view. So, even if you can't be convinced on the moral question, there are people who you can't hear and can't listen to because they're afraid of what will happen to them because of what they say here. So for me, that's just kind of like the basic question of, it's not just the freedom to speak, it's the freedom to hear. And we have some people here, who we're not allowed to listen to because of what could happen to them when they leave.
Thank you, Dr. McLaughlin.
I'm happy
Dr.
to continue. Yes, I'm happy to continue. I think Sarah articulated very eloquently the moral responsibility side of this answer. And there is obviously another side that you introduced, Meredith. What can we do? Actually, we do have the responsibility to do something, but can we do something? And, we can think of the capacity, the agency of universities in the US or in general. So if just to illustrate, I take the case of Turkey, for example. The Turkish government decides to close down really a number of universities, or Afghanistan, and send professors and students and administrators to jail for life. What can a university do from Turkey or from another part of the world, we can say? And this more generally, I think the part of the answer is, if there is any dialogue or negotiation, if the name of the person at the other side of the table is Goebbels or, I don't know, Erdogan or something like that, I would not mention other names, you cannot win as a university, right? So, or as an academy, you have to leave the country. Well, yes, there is truth to that, but there is still the moral obligation side. And there are things that we can do. There is solidarity. So we can help those who left or who stayed, and we can find ways to help them. And that is a responsibility of universities who can afford that. It is not always easy. So, if you have a student arrested when she goes back to Egypt, as it happens, or Iran, perhaps it's not easy to take that student out of the prison, but there is a moral obligation of the universities to act in defense of academic freedom of their own members of their own academic community, academic students, staff, and members of the global academic community. And there are ways of doing this, partnering with others, with governments. I think in the US, the situation is a little bit better because there is more freedom for universities institutionally than in other parts of the world. With there's Scholars at Risk, there are other organizations that can help. So there is some agency there, nevertheless. Although in extreme situations, there's very little an institution can do indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Matei. Dr. Tung or Dr. Sharifi, do you have any response, or would you like me to introduce another? Go ahead.
I'm just one thing, based on direct experiences that we had in the 1990s with the first Taliban government, and that was, in that time, Afghanistan was completely isolated. Had no contact except through Pakistan with the rest of the world. And that's why the dismantling of the higher education and education system in general, secondary education and higher education, in a way, it went unnoticed and nobody even cared. This time, the only difference that I can see that I believe can make a change or actually has a positive effect in long term is to actually, the stories should come out. It should be, people have to know. And as much as how authoritarian or totalitarian or dictator they are, but the point is, once the story is out and giving this outreach to the digital world and stuff, that makes it it provides, based on my personal experience, it provides a level of protection or an awareness and actually even hesitance from the authoritarian regimes to actually move even further against it. Oppression will continue, but the point is, once it comes out and it goes on and people knows about it around the world, that will have its effect, I believe.
Thank you so much.
Just briefly, I totally agree with Sarah, and the Chinese students in the United States and the related professors, they are not free. The Chinese students are not free to engage in the discussion if that topic is sensitive, and many professors self-censor. So that would definitely impact the free discussion. And for example, when they talk about Chinese human rights or politics or history, and they practice self-censorship, and then your the knowledge you receive would be twisted, and that will definitely harm your benefit. And I have one American student, non-Chinese American citizen, and she told me she had to quit my course because she wanted to go to China to do an internship, and she doesn't want my name appearing in her document.
Thank you all very much. I'm going to just follow up on this line, and I would like to ask if you have thoughts particularly on the countries that you are representing. And then we do have some great questions in the chat. So in the Q&A where there should be, and then we'll take those questions. But considering where all of you are from and the circumstances currently going on related to repressive regimes, particularly from the case that Dr. Tung raised for this Chinese gentleman who was with us at the University of Minnesota, who tweeted his opinions about the Chinese government and then was punished when he returned home. And we heard about that case. So a lot of us here at the University of Minnesota and then broadly across the United States had this conversation about how should we prepare students from countries that may be being watched for their experience? I think particularly undergraduates who come here enthusiastic and they're in what feels like a really open environment and they finally get to speak their mind. And the question is really, do we warn them about the fact that they may be monitored? Should we encourage them to let us know when they're feeling like they're maybe being harassed, either by a countryman, someone else from their country? So what would be, in order to keep them both safe and involved in the academic experience here, what do you think we ought to be doing to prepare them for what lies ahead? And we'll start with Dr. McLaughlin.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think you get to an important issue here is that, the students' agency, because we want them to know the risks, but we also don't want them to feel like they are just being told to shut up because it's too dangerous. So I think, the first step that I would love to see universities doing would be to give international students who come to the US just a basic, seminar or orientation about how to, speak freely and anonymously, perhaps, give them just a basic explainer on digital rights, how they can perhaps have an anonymous Twitter account that will be more protected than using their real name. Basic safety issues that they can talk through with the students to, let them make the decision on their own, because, I think it should be respected if they want to speak and they wanted to incur that risk. I think they should be respected for that choice, but they should, go into it knowing, the dangers that they might face for doing so. I do think universities also should be, making sure that students know that they can come to them. At Purdue University recently, there was a Chinese student who was really aggressively harassed by his peers. It occurred over WeChat. There were students saying they were going to report him to the government because, he spoke about Tiananmen, things like that. And I believe the president, Mitch Daniels, said, he came up with a really strong statement after he found out about it. He said he wished he'd known about it. And that's what I think should be done. I think it's important that students know that the university will listen, because I don't think they can assume administrators will listen to them.
Thank you, Dr. McLaughlin. Dr. Matei.
I think again what Sarah said is very, very, very important, and I don't have anything really to add by way of answering your very profound question. But I think the situation is really tough and dangerous, because sometimes it is not what the students did or said that might get them into trouble. It is the mere fact of studying in a US institution. You remember the case of Bard College from upstate New York, was declared in Russia, put on the list of enemies of the people. I mean, there is a more technical term than that. So you can be arrested. If you are a Russian student, studied 15 years ago at Bard College, when nobody knew this would come up, you can be arrested. You are a musician, you haven't done anything that threatens you, and apparently the government or the people of Russia. So how can we prepare students for that? I really don't know, but it can be very serious, and probably indeed the answer is in having some kind of information for students, so at least they know what we know at a certain time about the dangers.
Great, thank you. Dr. Tung.
Yeah, the first thing is the university should guarantee academic freedom and free discussion, and it will be very complicated when Chinese government is involved. I think that the case of Purdue University, if we have evidence that some Chinese students harassed other Chinese students based on their political opinion, or reported their speech to Chinese consulate, and those students should be should be kicked out or should be at least punished. And then the CSSA, the Chinese Students and Scholars Associations, and they are controlled and sponsored by the Chinese consulate, and their existence is a threat to free discussion on the American campus. So all universities should have more scrutiny on these CSSAs.
Thank you. Dr. Sharifi, I'm going to ask you the next question that was posed in the Q&A, and I don't think Barb Fry will mind me saying it's from Barb Fry. So she asks, particularly because we now know that during the pandemic, a lot of the universities developed much better digital technology for reaching students who weren't able to get here. And particularly in the case of students in Afghanistan, many of them whose studies were interrupted, who have not been able to leave. How can we use digital, this is Barb's question, how can we use digital media to educate students in countries like the ones we've been talking about with repressive regimes? And what steps can our universities and academics in general in the US take to protect students and faculty here? Let's start with the first part of this first. What do you think about this ability to get provide access to education digitally to students in Afghanistan?
As you said, especially after 2020, somehow almost all Afghan universities, specifically the university that I'm teaching and stuff, we completely transitioned into sort of like a digital world. We established sort of first to use the Canvas, but then after this kind of the Taliban takeover and stuff, we moved because Canvas can be traced and they can actually find out. So we just use Google Meets and Zooms, but like changing the links every time we teach. And then we just email first, maybe like half an hour before the class, we just send an email to everybody, not more than that. So here is the link, click on that on a specific time and we will be there. So that is like, for instance, the mechanisms for now we are using. And that's why I'm waking up every night at 3 o'clock in the morning to kind of reconnect with them because of the time difference and stuff. That is, and controlling, I don't know about the other countries, but this in terms of the Taliban, despite the support they get, they're yet not being able to sort of develop the technology to completely control everything. And I think that will be very difficult. But the point is we need to adopt. We had to adopt based on circumstances and change everything in order to remain connected, because the main question is connectivity. The content and everything will be developed in a time and a stuff, so at least sort of in a standardized text and stuff. But the main question remains connectivity. What we do, for instance, is the students like receive this phone kind of credit cards from the phone companies, and then on a specific time they just suddenly, and that's how they remain connected and stuff, through the phones and stuff. But I don't know how long it lasts, but so far we haven't had any problem in terms of like people being traced and tracked by these people. But at the same time, now that I notice about other universities around, and also through the online courses that people now voluntarily putting, other professors who are now forced to displace, they're using the same method, being abrupt, being unexpected, and change according to time. But the point is to remain connected, and that's what we're doing for now.
Wow, it's fascinating. Do any of the others have experience about how the availability of courses through the internet, I'll just use that expression, is impacting in a positive way students who are looking for information they can't get in their own country?
Another thing is the digital security. So that not directly to answering your question, but last year I involved in organizing an event commemorating the Tiananmen massacre, and one of the organizers, we used Zoom, and then immediately after that event, Zoom suspended the account of one of the organizers. So in my class, I allow some Chinese students, if they have security concerns, to be anonymous or to use pseudonyms.
Very helpful. Thank you. Sarah, I'm going to hand this one off to you. Well, first, I'm going to try to answer it myself because it is about privacy through universities in the US, but given the work you do, you might have a different answer. So one of the questions is, how do countries have access to what courses students are taking in another country? Isn't that personal protected information, and aren't universities responsible for guarding this data? So my answer as an administrator, it looks like my screen has frozen, but I hope you can still hear me. There we go. So in the US, yes, what a student is enrolled in is protected, and it would be very unusual for us to give that information out. But I suspect that given that much of this surveillance is done student to student, particularly where we have large groups of people from countries in repressive regimes, that information is shared, what you would call anecdotally, that I know another person from my country is taking these 4 classes. That's how I would imagine it's being shared, and not through official channels. But maybe Sarah, you have a response.
Yeah, so it's a great question. So there's a few different ways to answer this. So the first one is that COVID really threw a wrench into things with, student privacy. So, obviously everybody knows we had, almost entirely online education for some time. We had travel restrictions. So we had students who were taking classes in their home countries online. And so if you're in a country with, aggressive internet surveillance, that's, the answer for you for that one. It's going to be known to your government, especially if you're in a country like China with the Great Firewall and a lot of, surveillance there. The government's going to know what you're taking. Secondly, I think there is a little bit of carelessness sometimes when it comes to how administrations might handle this. So the name is escaping me which school it was. I know it was a university in DC, but in 2020, they temporarily had a policy saying that, and it was specifically for Chinese students, saying that if they received a government request about any student data, so even including things they posted on Blackboard, papers, class discussions, that they would hand those over to police requests. So, I think it's important that, and I don't know that that's happening widespread, but, if a university is careless in how it understands, foreign police requests and, security concerns, that's an easy way that information can be handed over. And then lastly, depending on the country and the government, there might be some restrictions that allow the government access to that information. So I believe it's Kazakhstan, but they had a requirement that students in a scholarship program hand over all of their university passwords and access information. So, that's the way that, it could be accessed there just on the government side without the university giving it away.
Thank you. This is a higher level question related again to the digital technology piece. So I'll throw this out and see who might have a thought on this one. This is from a member of the audience. In a project I'm currently engaged with, we are looking at effective capacity building for human rights defenders and academics in exile to pave the way for effective digital resilience. What are some of the skills we should incorporate into this capacity effort to combat transnational digital repression adequately? So it's a little related to what we were talking about, but I think it has more of a higher level aspect to it. And that is, what could we do either as governments or as academics to advance a system that would not be susceptible to governmental interference?
At least based on my own personal experience about this, the technology is constantly changing. And actually part of the way that it also has to deal with the issue of the policy and how the universities in a way all kind of come up with a policy that somehow ensures a level of sort of lack of kind of protection in the digital world for the students and stuff. We use the way I think of it, at least for now it's going to work, is that we trying to be very, in a way, not predictable, in a sense, in order to avoid susceptibility. But eventually, I think there is, in my opinion, no matter how technologically, how kind of complicated systems in universities will probably be very expensive, especially for the repressive regimes, they might find a way to penetrate it. And there is absolutely no guarantee in that, given that the world is very much fast changing. So at least for now, I think it has to do with the question of what the policy universities take in step, but also kind of remain a little bit unexpected and unpredictable in approach to how to remain connected and provide digital security.
Thank you, Dr. Sharifi. Any of the other panelists have a comment on that?
I was just thinking that this is really a question for specialists, of which I am not one. But as a university administrator, someone who tries to think about what universities should do in every major area, including this one, I think what I hear a little bit both in the question and in the answer is that we have to move away from an attitude that emerged after immediately after the Cold War, when we have assumed that there will be an unrelenting march towards democracy, more respect, acknowledgement for education. Then we had social media coming up, and we thought that would all be for the good. Arab Spring was a result of more social media. Then when all this is changing, and I'm thinking whether we shouldn't have, we might end up by thinking in terms of a digital Cold War in a way when we so we have to adjust our policies, our technical support infrastructure for an atmosphere of suspicion and also protection, which was not there for a couple of decades perhaps.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely a case of, people moving so fast, their side, our side, their side, our side, and it does require experts. So thank you. So here's a question that I think is really important to all of us. Again, I'm going to be in the US because that's where I am, but you could do it in any one of the countries. So a student speaks their mind, his or her mind, attends rallies, writes editorials, taking advantage of free speech opportunities here in the US. And the family at home is targeted for violence, reminders, threats. And what, if anything, would you recommend that universities do with respect to either guiding good advice for the student or action to protect the families abroad? Any comments there or any advice you can give us?
Yeah. So there are many such cases in China. Some one serious case is there are 6 journalists in DC. They are American citizens, but they are Uyghurs. And then their family members and relatives back in Xinjiang, China, were arrested. So at least 22 family members of those 6 journalists were arrested, and some were detained in the camps. So it's really difficult for universities or even the government to save those people, and when we can rely on the diplomatic efforts, the American government, if those journalists are working in a small country, that would be even more difficult. It's hopeless. But the American government is the most powerful government, and they should take this cases seriously, and they should demand the release of those family members of American citizens. And they should link this issue to other diplomatic talk, trade, or technology. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Tong. Dr. Sharifi?
To be honest, that's actually exactly what's going on with me. I mean, my father is back home and they're coming and they threatened my father. So actually, when I talked to him, he was like, I was using posts and everything. I published an article, and then my father told me, like, you need to be careful about that. I mean, you literally put me in things. They came to him, they threatened him and all the things. And but at the same time, the cases will be it varies everywhere, I suppose, depending on the nature and the circumstances and stuff. But I found it personally incredibly suffocating if I just completely remain silent in everything that's happening. So at the same time, and what I thought in a way, that if that happens, and it happens with some of other friends and others, the more we can actually, if that is being publicized, if that's being told a story, if that cases happens, the point is you should not remain silent. And that is one way of protection, at least in the cases I'm very familiar with. And otherwise, if just we remain silent, and then, because by the fact that we're teaching and stuff, we were really concerned in a way, it's a danger, whatever, I mean, as Dr. Ting Biao mentioned, but I think the one way to deal and even ensure some level of, in a way, protection is to have transparency about these cases. That is what I'm trying to do, and that's how I'm dealing with it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for sharing your personal story. I think it's obviously then shining light on it and using diplomatic channels. And Dr. Matej has a comment.
Yes, I remember just before the start of the Yugoslav wars, Milosevic was then president of Serbia, only adopted a very restrictive law about higher education. And the European University Association decided to stop any cooperation with Serbian universities because they complied with the law. They didn't protest the law, which was completely idiotic. And because what can you do? You cannot protest because you'll lose your job. You'll go to prison. So what I'm saying, we have to understand such situations. So, if you speak up in the US, your father in China or in Russia or in Iran might lose the job, might be sent to jail or worse. Right, so that is something that we have to acknowledge. On the other side, very briefly, and another comment, I think there is something that we haven't clarified enough in higher education regarding academic freedom and freedom of speech, because they are not the same, and sometimes the confusion may lead to dangerous situations. They overlap for sure, and they are both important. I'm not saying that, but if I am, I don't know, a Chinese student criticizing my government in a course in mathematics in the US, and that team, I have not done any research, it doesn't have anything to do with the content of the class, that doesn't fall under the protection of academic freedom in that regard. That is freedom of speech, that is different. But I think universities perhaps should strengthen this point about their dedication to knowledge, production of knowledge, transmission of knowledge, wherever it may lead, right? Because that's so we, it is a different thing. So yes, there are issues. If you speak up in a course in mathematics and then you are refused a job or you are sent into jail, that you still deserve protection. But I think this kind of politicizing beyond what is justified might lead to a certain risk, and a better argument, perhaps it will not protect everybody completely and will not save everybody, but it might be more reasonable to strengthen the argument of knowledge, and knowledge as a public good in particular that higher education has to do.
Very, very interesting comment. Thank you. Dr. McLaughlin, I don't want to cut you off. There's time for a final comment by you on this topic if you have one.
Sure. Yeah, I think this has probably been said already, but it's just in this circumstance, it's extremely important for universities to coordinate with diplomatic officials. This is not exactly the same scenario, but a few years ago, a University of Washington student who was Uyghur, she was, put in a camp because she accessed her university's website through a VPN while she was at home. And I think there was, I think it's a case where we can look at sort of kind of what to do, what not to do, because there was a lot of disconnect between University of Washington officials and State Department officials. And I think that was kind of unhelpful. So I think it's important that everyone be on the same page, and not be necessarily using it to make different political arguments, and just focus on the student, and their family and their direct concerns.
Awesome. Okay, look, it's already 11. Frankly, I wish we had another hour because we're just getting warmed up here, but I just can't thank you enough. The positions you represent and your own experience and your willingness to share your ideas with us is really, really helpful. So thank you. Thank you to everyone who attended. Thanks for the great questions in the Q&A. And I think we have a lot of work to do. So thanks everyone for being here. Have a great weekend.